My name is Stanford Thompson, and I am very humbled to facilitate this conversation, Breaking Bad Going Admin, which I've never seen Breaking Bad, but I hear it's about unsustainable habits involving certain things. So perhaps maybe that's where we were going with this or not. But I am the founder and executive director of Play on Philly, and I'm also helping the Sphinx organization run a new program, Sphinx Lead, that you can find out more about in your program book towards the back of it. But we have 10 very exciting arts administrators that are working all over the country. 2 are on this panel today with us. And I hope that you all have a chance to meet them throughout the rest of this conference. So our talk today is really about building a support network and creating opportunities for emerging leaders of color in arts administration. I want to encourage you all to interrupt at any time in this conversation simply by heading to the microphone that is in the center aisle. And towards the end, we will leave a little bit of time for some questions for our panelists. You also can participate in this by using the Slido.com or Slido app, I think Slido.com. When you go there, you will type in SphinxConnect. I believe maybe choose this room or something, and you can add questions that will go to this iPad in front of me. So I will do my best to pull some questions that you submit that way, or again, by using the microphone in the center of the room. I also want to encourage you to go to the SphinxConnect website to read the full bios of those on this panel. But I want to turn the time over to each one to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Stan. My name is Karen Cueva. I'm an arts administrator from New York City. I work as the manager for Play USA at Carnegie Hall's Wild Music Institute. And Play USA is a grant funding as well as professional development program that supports community music programming across the U.S.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hasmeen Morales. I'm from Los Angeles, California, and I work at the Colburn School, where I'm the manager of community engagement and career development in our newly endowed Center for Innovation and Community Impact.
Good morning. I'm Kane Thomason-Redus. I'm the Senior Director of Community and Learning here at the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. So welcome to Detroit. Thank you for coming. I'm also a flutist, and did have the privilege of being in the orchestra as a fellow as part of their orchestral fellowship program back just more than a couple years ago, and do still play the flute, and I do some outside work with El Sistema USA, with Early Music Now in Milwaukee, and with the National Flute Association.
So I want to say again, on the SphinxConnect website, you'll read their full bios. They're being extremely modest about their musical accomplishments as professional musicians, and of course the work that they do in their respective organizations. But the thing that I think is the thread between all of us on the stage is that there's a really deep sense of purpose and passion about arts education and cultural engagement, and firmly believe that we as administrators of color just might have different perspectives that already, I believe, in our 4 organizations has really helped lots of people connect to the arts in a really meaningful way. So I want to get things started off by asking a question to the group in no particular order, to just talk about what support and or opportunities were you given that helped elevate you to your current role?
I can start. I participated in a program when I graduated from high school. I was the summer between high school and college at the Smithsonian called the Young Ambassadors Program, which is a program out of the Smithsonian Latino Center. And when I participated, it was exclusively for graduating high school seniors in the arts, but now it's open for arts, sciences, and humanities. And that program brought a cohort of about 15, 17-year-old Latino kids who were artists and curious about what their careers could look like, and brought them to the Smithsonian for a 10-day intensive where we got to meet all of the Latino curators and programmers and astronauts and researchers and scientists, and it was amazing. And after that experience, we were sent out to Smithsonian affiliate museums across the country, and I landed in Albuquerque at the National Hispanic Cultural Center, where I basically began programming, and I programmed my first series for a group of kindergartners for their kindergartner museum trips, and fell in love with that, and ended up, as soon as I got to UCLA as a freshman, hadn't even started college yet, was eager to continue that work, and I got a job at the Fowler Museum of Cultural History at UCLA, programming a student series there. And once I graduated, went on to a presenter and worked in artistic. But it was really catalyzed by that experience at the Smithsonian, and not just that singular touch point, but when I graduated from college, I was brought back to the Smithsonian for a post-collegiate seminar and job training and resume workshops. And I'll also say that I met my husband through the alumni program, and we are one of 2 couples who have been married out of that program. So if you're thinking about alumni programming and what that looks like, an authentic alumni engagement, quite literally, look up that program. And they actually just did a 10-year long-term impact study on the cohort, and really what we have found is that because we have such high-level alumni engagement, that we are a really closely knit cohort, and we host young ambassadors that we've never met in our house. And so it's like that's really what radically changed the trajectory of my career and got me started in arts administration.
Thanks for asking that question, Stanford. I think it's a really good one. I think we all here, of course, are really good at acknowledging what and who helped us get where we are, but I think we do need a lot more of that in general. For me, support started very early, and I was very fortunate for that. I was certainly a scholarship student for my entire life, and that was an amazing experience for me. It started with San Francisco Preparatory Division at the San Francisco Conservatory. I was there for about 9 years as a scholarship student. I got my flute lessons, my chamber music, my music theory, some choir, just a whole series of experiences there. At my undergrad, University of Redlands in Southern California, scholarship opportunities there, performance opportunities, also early leadership opportunities. It was a very, very small liberal arts school that prided itself on actually its commitment to community service, learning through community service, developing leaders. So from very early on, I was able to mix my music making with impact in the community, and that was a great privilege there. Then, later on, going to Rice University, there was a graduate student grant I applied for, and we started a tiny outreach program that now is the Just For You music program. That's an awesome student-led effort, and we have some alumni here in the room of that as well. Those early opportunities, small dollars, small impact, but realizing that what you've spent hours and hours and hours in the practice room trying to perfect, yes, has that impact on the stage, but also can have an impact in the classroom, can have an impact in a person's life, in a community. Those were some very good early lessons for me. And then later on as a professional, while I was at the Sphinx organization as an employee there, got some great leadership opportunities, including Leadership Detroit and the American Express Leadership Academy. And those were opportunities to just really think kind of separate from what I do with my actual notes, just what my own, my own goals, my own style, my own priorities, how that affects my work, how it affects the people I work with, and certainly how it affects the people I'm trying to serve. So for me, it's definitely been a long, long, long road of education and learning, and conferences like this definitely keep it going. So thank you all for being part of it.
I'd like to speak to the role of the individual as a catalytic force, and just thinking back to my freshman year at Juilliard, where you can apply for a mentor, and that could be an alum, it could be a current faculty member, it could be anyone within the Juilliard community. And so I was paired with Tom Cabanis, who's a renowned teaching artist. And when I first got my mentor assignment, I went to the office and I said, I'm a violinist, and this gentleman teaches music theory to dancers. So I just want to be clear that this is the correct assignment. And thankfully, Beverly Nugent, who oversees that amazing program, she said, no, definitely, this is the right match. And so little did I know that Tom Cavanis would open my eyes to this world of teaching artistry, and would also share with me the projects and his own incubated ideas, which are now full-fledged programs at Carnegie Hall, and really being candid with me at such an early age about not only the work that he was doing, but the way that he was thinking about it. That was an invaluable resource, and ultimately allowed me to pivot to education after my time at Juilliard. And once I was doing a grad program in education, I went to the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and that's right. There I created an orchestra called the Du Bois Orchestra at Harvard, co-founded it, and that was to be able to bring in more voices into the canon, and a lot of that learning in the deep end around running an ensemble and creating a mission and a vision. A lot of that stemmed from the one-on-one conversations that Tom and I had throughout my undergraduate and graduate time at Juilliard.
Thank you. I'm not sure if Boston's going to be that happy tomorrow night, but excuse me. A couple of things that I heard from just this first round. I had to do that, guys. But Karen, hearing you talk about how perhaps maybe Juilliard knew something about you to match you with Tom, and obviously they took that time and maybe had an idea of where you might be heading before you even knew. Please correct me if I'm putting any words in your mouth. Kane, you talked about having all of these opportunities by the financial support of people over the years, but the grant opportunity that you had to form an idea, lead an initiative, get people kind of excited or engaged around an idea that you had. And Yasmin, you were talking about being able to program as an intern, correct? Being given real responsibility. You were going to have real people that would benefit from what you put together in your ideas. And then also the continued engagement, that they were going to bring you back, provide opportunities to keep you connected to one another, which also helped continue to push you in a certain direction. So thinking about the opportunities that you three were given, in perfect hindsight, what are opportunities that might have been missed that you wish that you had over your years?
I'll come up with something to say about that. Maybe this is just like reluctance to look back, but that is a tough one. I think this is going to sound like a cop-out, but here goes. So I think if I were to look back and change anything or any missed opportunities, for me, it may have been the opportunity to actually not quite do as many things. Because I think I tend to get excited about a lot of different things, and I tend to think that a lot of things are urgent, and especially as, say, like maybe an early undergrad, I kind of tried to do everything I could, and I was all over campus, I was all over musically, I was all over socially, not like partying, but just in terms of like interacting with different groups of people, service clubs, just lots of stuff. I was definitely figuring out who I was and where I was going to go professionally. I think I had more than enough opportunities, and I probably could have, if I were a little more mature at the time, decided maybe I don't need to do these 19 things, I could do these 14 things and do them that much better. That's my answer.
So this is a little tough to say, just because I am really grateful for my entire journey at Juilliard, which had highs and lows throughout it. I think coming from a background that would be considered, low income and all your other boxes that you want to tick, thinking about once I found this work in teaching, I was very passionate about it, and I wanted to remain just as passionate about my playing. And I think that in many ways, I received implicit and explicit messages saying, like, that's the thing. You found the thing. You should do more of this thing, of community engagement. And at the beginning, I resisted that because I did not want to be solely seen as a brown student working with brown students. And I wanted to be seen as a violinist and who was very competitive in the orchestral sphere. And I think that providing more space from the institutional perspective to allow me to craft my own identity would have been helpful. And I think that also the burden of being a student that needed to have 5 different work study jobs was also a factor in the next steps that I took professionally.
It's hard to say to look back and say, I wish I would have had, this one specific thing. I don't really look back on my trajectory that way, but I will say, mention a few things that did make me taking on those opportunities a lot more possible and realistic. And the most important thing is that I had paid internships. I had opportunities for paid internships. My parents did not live in an urban center, and all of the internships that I wanted to participate in were like in LA or in New York or in DC. And so I had to be able to make that sustainable. And so that was a huge game changer for me, that I was able to make that sustainable for myself. And also just look at, if I could change something in the trajectory of my early career, I would have ended up somewhere completely different, probably as a performer, if my earlier teachers had not discouraged me essentially from applying to a conservatory simply because I also played folk music. And so I was like, okay, then I'll be an ethnomusicologist. And I did that, and that ended up working out a lot better, I think.
So, Karen, you kind of put this thing on the table that I think we should talk about, maybe? Okay. So I'm going to put you on the spot just a little bit here. Being seen in your true light, your true identity, the ideas that you can bring to the table, obviously earning a bachelor's and master's at Juilliard and going off to Harvard, perhaps maybe you know how to play the violin and like how to think about things. When I think about the positions and even the work that we all do, that's really closely tied to community engagement. When I hear conversations from colleagues about how can we hire someone of color to work in a community role or a diversity and inclusion role or position to essentially fix a problem we didn't really create. And we can't necessarily run the institution or actually run a major department or be given an opportunity to really take and develop ideas through the lens that we actually have lived and experienced this world. What ideas, maybe advice, I mean, you have an audience of a good number of people that run these institutions. What would you help them see when they have their vice president position opening that you might be able to bring to the table through, again, your lens and your experience?
Thank you for that, Stan. I think that we need to be mindful of the emotional labor that people of color are carrying in organizations. And I think that when hiring, we are not solely responsible to fix gaps or to fill gaps. And I think that it would be a wonderful sign of meeting folks in the middle if institutions were just as avid about explaining how they have been complicit in creating those gaps as much as how they would like to fill them. And I think that if you're making a DEI statement, perhaps a paragraph before saying how your organization has contributed to that, would be an incredible sign of transparency and would be an exciting opportunity to also find new partnerships and to collaborate, because we're all interested in doing good work. We all do a lot of work that is far beyond our job descriptions, and we do want to do this together, but we want to do it in a way that honors our humanity and that allows us to create change together.
Thank you. So to build a little bit upon this, and this is really for all three of you, what do you think performing arts organizations and educational institutions could do to better recruit, retain, and promote art administrators of color?
I think a good first step is having a visible and transparent statement about where you stand on where your organization is along this process. Also, for me, in terms of like what would make a position attractive for me, I'm thinking about things like competitive benefits package, family leave. Is there an internal mentorship program, or are there people in the organization who are willing to mentor me in general? What are my opportunities for upward mobility? Like, am I being considered for an actual senior level decision-making role, or am I just another entry-level coordinator who is easily disposable as soon as I make a peep, right? So what, when I look around the building, when I'm there for my interview, it's like, okay, do you have gender non-conforming bathrooms? That says a lot to me about your stance on equity and inclusion at all levels, not just racial equity and inclusion. So I think those are really good places to begin thinking about that as you're trying to recruit, especially decision makers in your institutions.
I think there's some really practical, in some ways, simple ways to just kind of check assumptions and not allow for excuses. Anytime we've got a hiring situation, you've got an applicant pool, and you never want any one criterion or point of criteria to be the determining factor, but definitely one of those factors should be how diverse is your applicant pool. And diverse may mean different things in different places, but in general, you don't want your entire applicant pool to look like one or two or three sets of demographics. You want a really broadly diverse applicant pool, and that takes some specific efforts. You're gonna have to reach out through different networks, through different people, possibly through different recruiting agencies, post in different papers, whatever it is. I don't think people would accept hiring somebody who doesn't have the requisite skills. And so I think we also need to set up an environment where we aren't willing to completely exclude groups of people without even noticing. Like, if we have an applicant pool and we can say that, well, unfortunately, none of the 4 finalists came from any underrepresented category. If you look in that applicant pool, if you didn't have a decent percentage of people from underrepresented categories, there's no reason to expect that they would be in the top. But just numbers, like, any one person that's in an applicant pool has X percentage chance of being there. In its like most base form, it is a numbers game. We need to make sure we're actually including people in the process, and we may not always be getting to the people we need, but that doesn't mean they're not there. So we definitely have to work harder just on that kind of base level before we're comfortable saying, well, there was nobody qualified for this position that came from an underrepresented category. That just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So moments like this conference, this is an amazing recruiting opportunity. There are communication channels. We do need more communication channels. I think I'm not an HR professional, but I've done a bit of hiring, and I think the HR profession could use some DEI work as well. I think there need to be, especially in the arts, more better opportunities for actually connecting with people from underrepresented categories. So we need the training, we need the representation, we need the communication, but bottom line, we can't just be okay with whatever comes out at the end. We have to get very specific and hold ourselves accountable.
I personally really appreciate being able to talk to folks who are on the team that I would potentially be working with. I feel really fortunate that my learning and engagement team at Carnegie is my work family, and we're on a group text, and we're sending memes during, Super Bowl or whatever. And I think that being able to talk to the folks that that you're going to be doing this work with, you're going to be building with. It tells me about who you've thought of including on your team before my arrival, and who you want, post that. And I think really being able to communicate with teams as much as possible, I think, is important.
I'll never forget attending at Ithaca College. There were admission directors from universities and colleges across the country. And I'm forgetting the gentleman that was giving the keynote speech, but he was asked, we simply aren't seeing the candidates apply to our schools. And it's really hard to diversify our student body when they aren't showing up. And the keynote speaker, quickly said, well, somehow your sports teams find ways to go into the backwoods of Alabama and find amazing talent, and it makes your school a lot of money. And many of these folks go on to huge NBA careers, but somehow across the hall or across the courtyard or whatever, your fully staffed admissions departments of 75, 80 people somehow can't find the 2 or 3 kids from my high school that had pretty close to perfect SAT scores. It's easier to go into a marketplace. You visit your top high schools, usually private high schools. You recruit the students because you also know your very wealthy donors, their kids go there. And so everything kind of continues, but it would take you, sure, another 3 days to stop by a series of diverse high schools and, again, find those 2 students at a time. The other question was just about where resources were put. Do you really need to continue to go to the same places to find the people that already know you exist and will apply? So perhaps all of the recruiting dollars could go towards those places where, yes, there'll only be 2 or 3 candidates, but you can imagine when you roll up and you're the only one that has rolled up in a while, and you are mentoring, you are helping, that goes a long way. And sure, if everyone was doing that, even if those recruits did not go to your institution but went somewhere else, while some other institution was helping to recruit somebody that would ultimately come to yours, don't we all win? That's just a question I'm putting out to the universe. Okay, so what don't we talk about out loud when we are sitting around maybe the tables of our organizations and, ideas, people aren't being heard, maybe the right questions aren't being asked, maybe the right questions are being asked but not really answered or addressed. I'm just curious from the 3 of you if there are things that we just aren't talking about.
Racism. We still don't use that word. We still don't say it out loud. We still don't name it when it's present.
Anything else? Okay, all right.
White supremacy, if you want to get specific.
You have the microphone.
White supremacy and racism are what we're not really talking about. A lot of organizations are not, at least for us, we're not at the place where we're ready to look at what traditions of white supremacy we're perpetuating and upholding through our work, through our institution, through our student body, through our faculty, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that's just not, we're not quite there yet. So.
At the Detroit Symphony, I think I'm actually lucky to be part of a lot of conversations where we are talking about some of these issues. We do say racism, we do say white supremacy in conversations at work, and that's I think that's great. I am grateful for that. I think what we probably still fall prey to, which I think most organizations do, is just that feeling of a poverty of options to deal with those problems. We really do try to hold ourselves to a higher standard in just about everything related to diversity, equity, inclusion. But I think because it's It's one of those fuzzier, tougher issues that doesn't have dollars specifically attached to it. It can still be a challenge to really address with the same aggressiveness and persistence and thoroughness that we deal with our other imperiling challenges of audience development and artistic development and just making budget and all those things. So I would say we have a much stronger than average commitment to all of that diversity work, and it plays out at a lot of different levels. But we still need to be willing to put teeth in that for ourselves. We need to connect it to budgetary things. We need to connect it to measurements we're doing. I think we as a field, and definitely we as a society, have a fear of accountability on a lot of these issues. So even when we're in places that are willing to confront the issues, there's still that fear of accountability for what if we don't actually make goals on these issues. And we don't allow ourselves that luxury with other things, like making budget or having people in the seats. We don't say, what if we don't make our goals? We make our goals. So I think we need to take that same rigor and creativity and discipline and apply it to this other area that matters just as much. And will actually, in the end, of course, benefit all those other challenges that we are clearly focused on.
I think that similar to your organization, we are quite transparent in the conversation around race and equity. I think that in talking about oppression, I think we aren't talking a lot about power domination. And I think that we could have more conversations as a field about the ways that we're holding power so that it's exclusionary. And what I think we're making incredible steps into what we're willing to add to our organizations, but what are we willing to give up? And I think about relationships that, whether those are through partnerships or folks that we're hiring as subcontractors or things like that, that are perhaps upholding the very things that we're seeking to shift.
If you would not mind stating your name.
I
and
would
also your
not
question.
mind. My name is Andrea Cassett, and I'm the Executive Director of the Santa Fe Youth Symphony Association. And Stanford, thank you for making me wait. I want to speak to what an honor it is to be here as a white person and how incredibly inclusive I find the SphinxConnect organization and this community. One of the things I am practicing and working on in hiring is really linking the criteria I'm looking for with the job that's being done and how people of color can meet that criteria in a way that white people cannot. And I think that we're afraid to talk about that, and we're afraid to look at that, partly because of HR laws and even concerns about, quote, reverse discrimination and racism, you know, that thing that does not exist. But I recently hired someone who's working with, we have a large Latino and Hispanic community, and I recently worked with hired somebody who needed to speak Spanish, but more than that, they needed to have a bicultural awareness. And so the first, 15, 20 applicants I received didn't even speak Spanish. So there's this tendency to dismiss those criteria, and certainly as someone hiring in a small organization, I started to get nervous. I've got to fill this position. But I would encourage everyone in the room to wait, sit out the nervousness, stick with why it's so important. We've done a lot of work in our organization. I went to the board, I went to the staff, and I said, remind me why this is important. I'm nervous. And then the candidates started showing up, and I think sometimes we have to signal that this is a very important criteria, this is a requirement, and if we link what it is we're really wanting to create, it gives us a potency around that decision. It means we're not just saying, I need a person of color in this position because of representation. It's because there are unique perspectives and ways of meeting that are necessary, right? That some people can do and some people can't do. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. If there's no responses from the panel, I'll read a question that came in. Okay, so a question that came in, this is for Karen and Yasmin. Not just as people of color, but as women of color in a position of power, do you find that you are often thought of as bossy, more so than your white counterparts?
Yes, I'm frequently labeled intense at work. And I take it as a compliment now. That means that I'm not afraid to make white people uncomfortable.
I think that I'm a little bit on the flip side. I think that folks have warmly embraced me as a truth teller, and I'm really grateful for that. I think that really appreciate the question because of the intentionality of saying women of color, and I think that oftentimes, even in our rhetoric, we say we want to be inclusive to people of color and women, and some of us are both. So I think that is something that we need to move forward in our language usage, and I think in understanding what is at that intersection that makes us different, that makes us uniquely capable of addressing certain topics at organizations, and also understanding that we're not a monolith. We're not all perhaps perceived in the same way. And sometimes, based on certain situations, some people may come to you for your opinion as a person of color, and oftentimes may not see your identity as a woman. So I think that we need to talk about how we're viewing bodies and how we're racializing people.
Stan, let me just throw in there on the other side. I've been in so many meetings where I've said something and a woman in the room has probably said something similar at some point in the conversation, and my point was recognized and theirs wasn't. And, sometimes I'll call it out. I probably should do that more, but, that kind of thing should stop. I mean, we got to hear people when they're saying important things, and that is a broad statement that applies in lots of contexts, but really simple. If you're sitting in a meeting, make sure you're listening to every person who's talking, and don't wait for the person that you think you want to listen to. Hear what's being said to you.
That being said, I also just want to add to all the men in the room, you also have a hand in our liberation, in the sense that, for the men who are present in that room to say, oh, yeah, actually, she said that 5 minutes ago. And that makes us visible to everyone else in the room. And we really need advocates. I'm so lucky that my boss, who is a white man, is my number one advocate and will constantly say, no, this is you. I'm going to raise up your voice, or I'm going to advocate for you and go to bat because I believe in what you bring to the table. So if you're especially a man in the room and you have women on your team, make sure you're being mindful about how you are, either complicit in their oppression or in their liberation at work, and their visibility.
So, thank you. As Megan comes to the microphone, I will answer a very quick question that came through, which is, why isn't one of your panelists from a grassroots organization or practice? I guess maybe the facilitator is from a grassroots organization that was born in West Philadelphia, teaching almost 500 kids music every single day after school. So while I guess I haven't said too much, I was trying to give a lot of space for our panelists and certainly understand that they are from mammoth, pretty big organizations. Okay, sorry. Megan, please.
Sure. I'm Megan. I work for the Wisconsin Conservatory of Music in Milwaukee. I've known Kane for a long time, and like Kane, and I'm sure many people in this room, I studied to be a performer and found my path in administration and education. And something that I struggled with as a young person that has gotten better, but I think is still something that's not really talked about, is that there is a stigma for young musicians that going into education and teaching artistry and community engagement and all kinds of administration means that you aren't good enough to make it as a performer. Whereas I have found the absolute opposite. The best performers, the highest level of musicians, become the best administrators, the best teachers. And I'm wondering from all of you, how do we communicate with our young musicians earlier on? Like you said, that early on, community impact and doing this kind of work was a part of your musical training. How do we make that a part of their musical upbringing when they are still starry-eyed about playing concertos and want to be the highest level performers, but we also want to encourage them to start looking at these other things without making them feel like, well, you're not going to get an orchestra job, so you should probably do this instead.
I think one of the things we need is better options earlier on. That it isn't this very strict dichotomy. You either will play concertos in front of an orchestra or you will email all day. It's, you know, there are truths to both of those, but there's also the vast majority of the world that lives in between those. And you know, like we both experienced at Rice, like with doing outreach there, the stuff you are practicing in the practice room doesn't just have to live in the practice room and on stage. And when you actually take your art form and your craft out to different places or bring different people to them, you don't make it worse, you make it better. Same with teaching. I mean, you know, when I became a university professor, I started becoming much more efficient in my own practicing because I would spend many hours a day trying to help people understand like these little nuggets of essential things about music, and just distilling it in my mind made me a better player. So it doesn't mean that you throw your instrument down and run out and commit your life to saving everybody else. You actually can do both. You can continue to develop as a musician and find ways for that music to benefit more people. As far as the stigma, I think one helpful way to get rid of the stigma is when you look at the best musicians in the world, they are some of the most amazing communicators and most amazing, you could call them teaching artists. They kind of did it before it was teaching artistry. But, you know, the people that are beloved the most tend to engage. They tend to contribute. They tend to want to partner and collaborate. And those are skills that maybe they were the chosen ones and just had within them, but there's nothing wrong with developing that early on. So if we look at our highest examples of artistry and see that it goes along with social impact and willingness to work and collaborate, then maybe a tiny bit of the stigma can go away.
I haven't had a major performance in 3 years, and I have a lot of debt from Juilliard that says that I can play a scale. And so I feel that perhaps some of what you're addressing can also be mitigated by the professional field on the other side of saying that administrators also have artistic identities and need to have that be cultivated, and begin chipping away at the real dichotomy that's existing between my beloved friends who are in this freelancing hustle and who are who maybe don't have the luxury of the time to, you know, get together and jam, but who are also implicitly saying with that, you know, you're in a different place and I'm not going to play with you. And so I think that there's a lot of work to be done there, and if we're perhaps doing that there, then that could impact further down the line.
Well, I said, Curtis, I learned all 12 of my major and minor scales, so.
Can't say that. Can't say that.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
If I could just, Stan, if I could just really quickly throw in there, taking an orchestra as a model, if we had orchestras where the musicians are supported in their efforts in the community and staff where their efforts as artists are supported, that breaks down some of those walls. So just, you know, workplaces, institutions, think about how you can support both sides of your organizations to be better on the other side.
So let's do our best. I think that we can make it through these questions. All of our panelists might not be able to respond, so we could at least hear from the 4 people that are here.
Good morning. My name is Natalie Howard, and I'm a vocalist from Austin, Texas. You mentioned the racializing of people. My question is, have you ever been made to feel that you must represent the entirety of one group of all people of color by your colleagues? If so, how did you respond?
I believe we all have the same Google, and we all have the possibility to learn. It's our moral responsibility to learn about one another's experience. People of color have been learning and adapting to culturally dominant experiences our whole life, and it is our shared responsibility to learn.
Especially when I was working in Artistic for a Presenter, I was frequently asked about what Latino audiences want. And I think it's an important discussion to have, and I think I can bring a lot to that conversation, but I always try to say, like, well, I don't know what they want, but here's what I'm curious about, right? Like, I can't, prefacing by saying, like, I don't speak for an entire community, right? So that they're like, oh yeah, this is just like one Latina person, not an entire community, right? So just like reinforcing that when it comes up in conversation, but also using it as an opportunity to like make your voice heard about what might be useful for your community.
When it happens, I call it out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Yolanda Brown. I am from Jackson, Mississippi. I was not going to ask a question until you mentioned two very relevant words in my world, racism and white supremacy. In Mississippi, those are almost non-polite words to say, but it's very relevant. I am on the board of the Mississippi Youth Symphony Orchestra, which is a program of the Mississippi Symphony Orchestra. And probably like most orchestras, small orchestras across the country, it's changing. I guess, kind of the normal audiences or the traditional audiences are becoming more browner or more brown. And a lot of the people who have typically been in the orchestra are beginning to die off. Jackson is a city that is about 85% black. However, the symphony orchestra does not fully support the black and brown kids who are in the youth orchestra. I have the ear of the executive director of the Mississippi Symphony Orchestra, and we have tried to have those. We have a very nice and polite relationship, but in order to move forward and getting more of our kids into this industry, into this space, there need to be real and honest conversations about the barriers. And I think it begins with a change in the mindset and the mentality of the executive board and the conductors and the musicians. And it's just, maybe it's a little tweak, maybe it's a total shift for them, but it's not there. It's that support is not there for the kids who are beginning to start. I do what I can to make sure that I expose as many of those kids to orchestra as possible, but I guess I need, and I've gotten a lot of ideas being here. This has been awesome, but I guess I need that confidence and that blueprint to sit down and talk to the executive director to let them know why they should be here, why it's important for them to be here, and what can I do to kind of bring that conversation along. I would love any advice. Thanks.
Well, I will say very quickly, people in this audience, I've already heard from, I don't know, 3 or 4 of you that have gone through a similar thing. And after coming here for 2 or 3 years, you were finally able to get your executive director or board members here. I would say please find, your name again?
Yolanda.
Yolanda, please find Yolanda and talk with her. Because I think those that I've heard from, I see some of you in this room, can actually provide her with the answers that she's looking for. So if you don't mind,
Yes.
I would like to move to the next question.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And people, please talk with Yolanda. Thank you.
Perhaps this is pretty similar to the previous question, but I'm wondering how in your organizations you've approached white people who are in positions of power who maybe are well-intentioned but are not equipped to do the work in diversity, equity, inclusion. How do we go about that? How do you talk to them without, making them feel sensitive? Or, making them feel sensitive.
Well, I will certainly say that's a personal problem. But I think some honest, respectful dialogue, being consistent, not letting things kind of fly by. You can't change everyone, but at least you can put it out in the air. And I think, really kind of building support around why it's important to have these types of conversations. It takes time, but it sounds like, for example, Kane, your experience with the DSO, I'm not sure if you walked into a situation where these conversations were happening or if it developed while you were there, but perhaps people like Kane again, in conversation with you, he might have something quick to say, can point you more in that direction.
And let me just say, like, while it's not the job of people of color to help others become more knowledgeable, it is an opportunity that I personally try to take to just share personal stories and help them see my perspective. So if it's somebody that I really care about and want to invest in their understanding, rather than telling them what they're supposed to think, I just try to share my own stories, my own perspective, experiences of my own family, just give them some of that perspective that they don't have. And if they take it, then great, we've got somewhere to go. If they don't, then that's probably a different course. And luckily, I haven't bumped into that very often.
I no longer, I'm trying to make this a practice, but I'm striving to no longer do that work on my own. And so there are certain white allies that I know that can come with me in a conversation, because I also understand that there are some things that I say that can't be heard if they're coming out of my mouth. So I think that if you're able to identify other white people who can come with you in that conversation and support you and say, I second this because, but it's, yeah, certainly an ongoing process.
All right, so unfortunately, we can't get to the last question. They're telling me that we must stop. But out of respect for our next session that will happen in this room, I do want to ask everyone in this audience, if you're not participating in that, to please leave as quickly and quietly as possible to get ready for the next session. And if you all could help me thank our panelists one last time.